Well, good afternoon, everyone, and should I say good evening? I keep wanting to say good afternoon each time I come on the air. I guess I don't want to hit that evening time just yet, but I'm always saying good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. But today it's good evening, good evening, good evening. And welcome everyone to HBCU today, should I say, on Block Sports. And this is going to be your game day. And for you, I would like to welcome you again to Block Sports tonight. And today we are going to go over some of the games that have already taken place today. And we're going to see whether or not your favorite HBCU school won today, or whether and how they fared, and how we think they're going to fare later on during the year. And there is one game in particular that I saw today that has really actually two games that has really kind of made me kind of stand up and say, this is kind of interesting in the score. But as we go through the games, you will understand and see why I have such an interest in those games and what's going to happen later on in the year. And but you know what? Without further ado, let me go ahead and jump right into it and just take a look at what we have for the outliers. And what I mean by the outliers, these are the schools that are not associated with one of the four major HBCU football conferences. And even though there are 5 HBCU conferences, but there are only 4 conferences that have football programs. And that is the SWAC, the MEAC, the SIAC, and the CIAA. And we have what we call the independents. And those are schools that are not currently in an HBCU conference, but they are still regarded as HBCUs. And with that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at these scores. And we're going to take a look starting with the independents. And the first games that we will see are just the regular games. I guess you could say, if there's such a thing as just the regular games. And as you can see, first we have Kaiser Seahawks leading Florida Memorial in the third quarter by a score of 34-7. And these scores, I might add, these scores are coming to you by way of YourStreet.tv scoreboard. And we try to make sure that these scores are updated to you as often as possible. But every once in a while, we will go in and double check just to make sure that there are updates somewhere else. And we also go for those updates to another company called the Oniden Group. And he has been associated with my company for several years, and his name is Mr. Eric Moore. And I wish Mr. Moore success on his health. I know he's been under the weather lately, but we will be checking on him just to make sure he's coming through and doing fine. But let's go back to these scores again. And as you can see, the next score we have the West Virginia State Yellow Jackets. They're leading the Battlers by a score of 9-3. And we have the Aggies of North Carolina A&T tied. Game just started not too long ago with Bryant, and currently the score is 0-0. But the score that has caught my eye more than anything else is Tennessee State at home losing to Lane College by a score of 28-27. Wow. That's all I have to say is wow. Tennessee State losing at home to Lane College. Lane College happens to be in the SIAC. Not to say anything negative about the SIAC, but they are a Division II school. And here you are looking at Tennessee State losing at home 28-27 to Lane College. Now, Lane College currently is 3-2 overall. And even though I am really getting ahead of myself here in these scores, but just looking at this score just from face value, my gosh. And here, I'm looking at how well I thought Tennessee State was playing, and especially when they played Jackson State, even though they did not score a touchdown. They lost to Jackson State by a score of 16-3. They played with a lot of vigor, a lot of energy. They got after the Tigers of Jackson State like that was the last game that they were ever going to play. And then here they are losing to Lane College, a Division II school. What does that say about Lane College? Or what does that say about Tennessee State? This says a lot on both sides of the ball. Now, Lane College, granted, well, I'm really getting ahead of myself because I'm getting ready to go into the schedule and the standings for the SIAC. But before I get there, gosh, I need to slow my roll and take a look at the other scores. And the scores that we will take a look at will next be the other scores in the SIAC and the scores in the CIAA. But before I go on to the standings, let's go ahead and take a look at the scores in the SIAC and the CIAA. So as we take a look here, we have in the second quarter, Central State is leading Allen. Central State is leading Allen by a score of 14-13 in the second quarter. Tuskegee pulling out the victory in 2 overtimes against Clark Atlanta. Tuskegee winning 45-43. Great game there. Miles College losing in the battle of, I guess you could say, the battle of when they played in the championship for the SIAC. And as you can see, the Golden Bears lost to the Golden Rams. And as I said, this was a rematch from the championship game for the SIAC 2021 football championship when Albany State defeated Miles College last year for the championship, and they went on to play in the playoffs. And as you can see, they lost, unfortunately, for, I guess you could say, for them. But as we continue on looking at the rest of the scores, as you can see, as I said, Albany State defeated Miles College by a score of 20-3. And the rest of the scores, here you are, the battle of the undefeated. But Fort Valley State is no longer undefeated. They have lost to the Benedict Tigers. and they are continuing to scratch and claw their way to stay on top after defeating Fort Valley State by a score of 45-13. And the score that I talked about earlier, Lane College defeating the Tigers of Tennessee State by a score of 28-27. Wow, that's all I have to say for that game right now. It's just wow. That says a lot about both teams. But we're going to keep our eyes on Tennessee State because this can either be a big awakening for the team, or it can be something that says we need to take a look at the coaching staff that's currently at Tennessee State. Hate to call you out like that, Coach George, but it really does. Because if you cannot get your guys up to play against a Division II school, even though that Division II school is pretty good, pretty decent, one of the games that they lost to being Lane College, and as I am, yes, I am getting ahead of myself, and I know, I apologize, but one of the teams that they actually lost to was UAPB, and that score was 48-42, barely lost that, and the other team happened to be Benedict, who happens to be undefeated. So it's kind of interesting in regards to who Lane College has lost to. Another FCS school, the same as Tennessee State, but they also lost to the number one team in the SIAC, which happens to be Benedict. And they're sitting, well, getting ahead of myself, really getting ahead of myself. I really want to get to the standings, but I'll leave that alone for the moment as we continue to look at these scores. And as I said, as we looked at that last score for the SIAC, and as I said, that last score that we saw, and these scores sit on top of each other. It's just interesting to see that, where Benedict defeated Fort Valley State by a score of 45-13, and Lane College defeated Tennessee State by a score of 28-27. Later on down the line, these two will have to meet, and they will have to decide whether it's in the championship game or they may never see each other for this year. But we'll take a look and see where they are in the standings. So let's go ahead and take a look at the CIAA. So in the CIAA, as you can see, Bowie State is getting back on their winning ways. They defeated Livingstone by a score of 53-7. So they're telling everyone we may have lost a couple of games, but we may have been down, but we're not out, and they're coming back. And just like a pit bull, just like a bulldog, when he gets his teeth into you, he's not letting go. And as you can see, they did not let go of the Blue Bears of Livingstone, defeating them by a score of 53-7. Next, we have Virginia Union. They are just saying we are the team to beat. Doesn't matter what Bowie State or anyone else has done in the past, but Virginia Union is saying that this year we are the team in the CIAA that everyone will have to defeat, because we are showing that we are the class of this division, of this conference this year. And they defeated, as I said, St. Augustine's by a score of 69-0. Wow, way to go. So congratulations, but let's continue. And the next set of scores that we are taking a look at here, and these scores, as I mentioned, they are coming to you by way of our website, and that is www.yourstreet.tv. And you see Shaw losing to Virginia State by a score of 28-24. And with that, that says Virginia State is right behind Virginia Union, saying we're not letting you get too far out the way, and we are going to be right there, right behind you, making sure that if you make a misstep, we're right there to take it in first place. But we'll take a look at the standings in just a few minutes. Now, let's go ahead as we move forward. We're going to take a look at the MEAC and SWAC conference scores. But we'll first take a look at the MEAC scores first, and let me make sure that all of the scores have been updated here before I get into it. And there we go. And as far as the MEAC scores go, and let me make sure you guys are seeing what scores are who. There you go. And as you can see, we have Robert Morris trailing the Delaware State Hornets. And they're proving to be a team that is to be reckoned with in the MEAC conference. And they're leading Robert Morris by a score of 7-3. And the team that I thought would really, really play a major role in deciding who would win the MEAC, but yet and still, the MEAC season hasn't started just yet. So they still may play a major role in who wins the MEAC conference. But the Norfolk State Spartans, they lost to Sacred Heart by a score of 31-14. And in some of the games, they haven't been close. That's the nicest way I can state it. I'm actually somewhat perplexed in how the Spartans have played so far. I'm really surprised. I thought that they would come out playing a lot better, a lot harder, but I'm actually seeing things in this team that I'm very surprised at, and it's very interesting, and so I'm going to wonder whether or not they can dig themselves out of where they are. But we're going to see how well they play later on down the line, especially when the season starts, when the season starts in conference play, because technically speaking, that's really when the season starts, is when conference play begins. But let's continue on with the scores from the MEAC. And as we continue to take a look, we see that North Carolina Central took it on the chin by losing to the Fighting Camels of Campbell by a score of 48-18. And that game says a lot to me about what's coming down the line. And that will be on October 22nd, when the Jackson State Tigers actually will host the Fighting Camels of Campbell for their homecoming game. North Carolina Central had been running through a lot of teams like a hot knife through butter, and a lot of prognosticators were actually saying that Central was better than the Tigers of Jackson State. A lot of individuals actually ranked, not in the polls, but some polls, and some individuals actually said that they were better. But in the FCS polls, Jackson State is ranked higher than North Carolina Central. But here, Campbell proved that they were a much better team than North Carolina Central by defeating them by a score of 48-18. And it's going to be interesting in the next 3 weeks what Jackson State will end up doing, who happen to have a bye week this week. But later on down the line, when these two teams meet, it'll be interesting to see whether or not Jackson State will fare better than North Carolina Central. So some of the other games that are currently going on, as you can see, you have Morgan State, who's continuing to play pretty decent ball. They defeated Virginia Lynchburg by a score of 44-10. And, of course, Howard University, even though they lost, they are playing pretty inspired football. But they lost to Yale by a score of 34-26. And, as I said, they are playing, they being the Bison of Howard University, they are playing some very inspired ball, even though, as I said, I do understand that they lost today's game. But the one thing that they are showing me is that they are not the Howard of old, that guaranteed win, no problem. We can beat them 55-0, 55-10, it'll be okay. Not the same team. And if you're expecting to beat them like that now, I don't think that's a smart idea. Not a smart idea. Not something smart to think of doing. Because Howard University is coming to play, and their football players have that mentality. As I said, if they don't win this year, I would not want to face them next year in conference play. And since the conference play hasn't started yet, I still say watch out for Howard. Don't count them out. Do not, I repeat, do not count Howard out. And with that being said, let's move over to SWAC play. In the SWAC, we have the Rattlers of Florida A&M leading Mississippi Valley. Now, what happened last year is that Mississippi Valley almost caught Florida A&M flat-footed. They played Florida A&M very tough, and as you can see, only trailing Florida A&M by a score of 14-7. They're playing them pretty tough today, and I would not take the Delta Devils lightly, because if you make a mistake and take the Delta Devils lightly, then they may put the whammy on you and end up defeating you. I don't think that's something that you would want to have happen, even though you're playing a home game. You don't want the same thing to happen to you that happened to Tennessee State, even though Mississippi Valley is in the same classification as Florida A&M. But Florida A&M is supposed to have a much better team than the Delta Devils. But the game is still in the second quarter, and they still have a lot of ball to play. So let's continue on with some of the scores. As you can see in the second quarter, you see Texas Southern leading Alabama State by a score of 7-0. And as I said a long time ago, as I said last year, and as I have continued to reiterate, there are no easy wins in the SWAC. And I can easily say that now. There are no easy wins, even though there may only be 6 teams. But there are no easy wins in the MEAC conference. We will see by the time they get to the third week of MEAC conference play how each team fares and how they're looking by week 3 of conference play. I know we're farther on down the line, but I'm saying week 3 of conference play for the MEAC. We're already into conference play for the SWAC conference. But in terms of the MEAC conference, we're going to see how well these teams are playing. But in terms of SWAC play, you can already see Texas Southern, they came to play. And if you take them lightly, they will defeat you. Ask Southern. Southern thought that, hey, this was going to be a cakewalk. Guess what? It was a cakewalk for Texas Southern. So one of the Southerns did win. It just wasn't the Southern that everyone thought would win. So Texas Southern is a team to be reckoned with. And as you can see, they're still leading in the second quarter over Alabama State by a score of 7-0. Will that score hold? We shall see. Other scores in the SWAC conference, you have the Southern Jaguars, here talking about Southern University. Southern Jaguars are leading the Golden Lions of Arkansas Pine Bluff, or UAPB as we like to call them, by a score of 21-3 in the second quarter. And also here we have, and let's make sure we get that score back up for you. We also have Grambling losing to Prairie View by a score of 7-0. And then Bethune-Cookman, they played and had a great fight against the Wildcats had a great fight against the Bulldogs, but the Bulldogs eventually pulled this game out, defeating Bethune by a score of 35-27. Both teams have been having a hard, rough go of it this year, and as you can see, the Bulldogs ended up defeating those Wildcats of Bethune-Cookman by a score of 35-27. And as we take a look at the standings, we'll see how each team is looking. And as a matter of fact, since we've just finished with the SWAC, I'll go ahead and start with the SWAC scores, and these scores will be coming to you by way of each conference's website. As I said, these scores are going to come to you by way of each conference's website. Some of the standings have been updated for some of the schools, but some of them have not been updated, and we can easily take a look to see whether or not all the scores have been updated, which means the current standings have been updated for their placement. As I said, some of them will and some of them won't be updated, but as we continue to pull them up, we will go into that level of detail for you. So in the SWAC conference, as you can see in the East, Jackson State, they had a bye week this week, and they are still 4-0, 2-0 in conference play. Florida A&M, they're currently leading right now by a score of 14 to leading by a score of 14-7 over the Delta Devils. And as far as that game goes, and as a matter of fact, I'm going to do some additional checking to see whether or not these games are some of the scores have been updated, and if they are, great. But if not, then I'm quite sure some of those scores are remaining. But as we continue to take a look at the SWAC conference, okay, sorry about that. I'm pulling up these scores here for you. But as we continue to take a look at the standings here, you see that Bethune-Cookman is 1-1, 1-3 overall, not having fared well today. And right now that game has just moved to the third quarter between Florida A&M and Mississippi Valley, and that score is still 14-7 in favor of Mississippi Valley. I'm sorry, in favor of Florida A&M. And as we stated earlier, Bethune-Cookman ended up losing earlier today to Alabama A&M. And as you can see, their records indicate that each team is 1-1. Alabama A&M winning and Bethune-Cookman losing. So now they have a tied record. But as you can see, their overall record, each team has only won one game. So those teams are struggling. Whereas Alabama State, as you can see, they're 0-1 in conference play. And if the scores hold up today, they may end up being 0-2 if Texas Southern prevails. And as you can see, Texas Southern is 1-1 in conference play, 1-3 overall. But leading the West, you have Prairie View and Alcorn. Prairie View happens to be 2-0, whereas Alcorn is 1-0 in SWAC play. And Alcorn has a bye on today, and they will be playing, of course, next week. And when they play next week, they should be playing Mississippi Valley State. And they will be traveling up to Itabena to play the Delta Devils. And we'll see whether or not they are successful. And, of course, as you can see, Southern University, they are yet to win a game in SWAC play, but they're well on their way to possibly winning, leading by a score of 21-3 over UAPB. And if they win, then they'll be 1-1 and 2-2 overall. And of course, Grambling is 0-1. They have a bye week today, but as you can see, they're also 1-3 in conference play. The SWAC conference is somewhat finishing up the way or going according to plan. However, the only team that is a surprise is where Southern is right now. Of course, Prairie View and Alcorn, they're playing traditional, their regular ball. But with Southern being at the bottom, having not won a game as of yet, that should change if they hold on to beat UAPB. And if they defeat UAPB, of course, Pine Bluff will still not have won a game, whereas whereas Southern would be right behind Alcorn State. But as we were saying earlier, Texas Southern is leading Alabama State. And if they hold on to defeat Alabama State, the one thing I don't know, and I apologize to you, is whether or not this is considered a conference game for Texas Southern. But we'll find out after the game is over, and as these conference scoreboard will be updated. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the MEAC conference. Now, as I said, the one thing about the MEAC conference is that they have not played any conference games. Their first conference game will take place starting, well, for some teams, starting next week. And I wanted to verify that by taking a look at the games that they have coming up for next week. And hopefully I can, with the quickness. Seems like I'm not moving fast enough because I want to move a lot faster. But of course, I'm not moving fast enough for my own good. But as I said, I believe the first set of MEAC games will start next week, and yes, they will. And the very first MEAC game will take place between Morgan State and Norfolk State. And with this game, you will have, I guess you could say, two newcomers to the game. Coach Wilson for Morgan State and also Coach Odom. Now, this will be Coach Wilson's first year with Morgan State, having moved from Bowie State. And as we take a look at their records currently, Morgan State happens to be 2-2. Norfolk State is 0-4. And with the way Morgan State is playing, and with the way Norfolk State is playing, I'm almost afraid to say that the new kid on the block, being the coach from Morgan State, I don't know whether or not Norfolk State will end up defeating Morgan State. Now, if Morgan State defeats Norfolk State, and that happens to be a home game for Morgan State, and if Morgan State holds on or defeats Norfolk State, that will say a whole lot about where this conference is going to be headed, and that'll say a lot about what Coach Wilson said about if there's a conference championship game to be had, he intends to be in it. Now, there's not a championship game in the MEAC conference. It just happens that they play each team, and they will either be 5-0, 4-1, or so on and so forth. But the winner of the MEAC conference will go on to play in the Celebration Bowl, and that's the game that Coach Wilson is looking forward to playing. The coach for the MEAC conference. The coach for Morgan State. But it'll be interesting to see whether or not that actually takes place. But as I said, the first game in the MEAC conference will take place next week. And then we'll talk about the standings for conference play for the MEAC. And then after that, the following week, which happens to be on the 13th, we will only have one game. And again, that'll be against Morgan State, against North Carolina Central. And this means that Morgan State would either be 0-2, 1-1 if they lose to Norfolk State, and if they lose to North Carolina Central, they would be 0-2. If they end up winning one of those games, they could easily be 1-1. I know I'm speculating here. Or if Coach Wilson puts his money where his mouth is, and I've had a chance to interview Coach on a couple of occasions, I'm almost willing to say that, yes, he expects to be, after the second week and after the 13th, he truly expects to be 2-0 in conference play. I'm telling you, don't count these guys out with Morgan State. But they haven't started conference play because one of these teams that we're looking at right now is also South Carolina State. And we can easily say South Carolina State has everybody where they want them. Because if you remember where South Carolina State was last year, they were 1-4. Yes, that is right. South Carolina State was 1-4 last year. And then all of a sudden, after they went 1-4, all of a sudden, they went on a winning streak. And this was after they lost to Florida A&M, if I'm not mistaken. But as I said, South Carolina State could have everybody where they want them because they don't enter conference play until October 15th. I'm sorry. They don't enter conference play until October 22nd. And that's when they go up against North Carolina Central. And that game will be at home against North Carolina Central. Now, North Carolina Central will have played only one game in conference play themselves. So this will be South Carolina State's first game in conference play and North Carolina Central's second game in conference play. And this early on in the season, as far as I'm concerned, guys, I might even end up at that particular game doing a pregame show. And as far as I'm concerned, guys, this might be for the championship of the MEAC this early in the season. Now, I'm quite sure as we look at the standings again, one team that may have a say in this is also Delaware State, because they too have been playing some very good ball as of lately. But of course, as you see on top, you have North Carolina Central. And so you have North Carolina Central, Delta State, Morgan State. But like I said, look at lurking at the bottom, 1-3. They were 1-4 last year. I cannot let that go. South Carolina State was 1-4 last year, and they ran the table, went 6-1 in the final half of the season after they went 1-4. And they ran the table. And not only did they run the table, they beat the snot out of Jackson State in the Celebration Bowl, defeating them 31-10. And no one gave them a chance on God's green earth to even come close to even scoring a point against the Tigers of Jackson State in the Celebration Bowl. But look at them. They got them where they want everyone. So with that being said, I'm going to pay a close eye, keep a close eye on South Carolina State, and also, surprisingly, Morgan State. I know I spent a lot of time on the MEAC, but this conference really interests me in terms of where they are and what they're doing. But another conference that is also becoming very intriguing, and that happens to be the SIAC. And as I said, the standings are coming to you by way of each conference's website. I do want to give credit there. These standings are coming to you by way of each conference's website. So you had a chance to see the website of the SWAC. You had a chance to see the website of the MEAC conference. Now you will actually have a chance to see the website of the SIAC. The SIAC. And here you are. And as you can see, you have Benedict sitting on top. And they've just said to everyone, you know what? Bring it on. And they're defeating so far. They're defeating all comers But the elephant that's in the room is still Albany State. They happened to defeat Fort Valley State, who was undefeated until, of course, they played Benedict. But the elephant in the room, as I said, guys, happens to be Albany State. And as we take a look, in 2 weeks, they will play Albany State at Albany State. And that game is scheduled to be on the 15th. And I told my buddy that's down in Albany State University, I may end up coming down there and having a pre and post game show, because that might be for the East, in the East Division of the SIAC, because I believe whoever wins the East Division of the SIAC will probably go on to win the conference championship football game. However, as you can see now, Lane College is actually 3-2. The website was not updated, but they are actually 3-2 as of today's games. Miles College is, and as I said, some of these games have not been updated. And Miles College, and let's check to find out whether or not the game for Miles had been updated. And that game had not been updated today, and they were playing Albany State. And as a matter of fact, I can tell you that they were, if they have not already lost to Albany State. But just as a matter of fact, they have. They had already lost to, and yes, I was confirming, they had lost to Albany State by a score of 20-3. So some of these games have not been updated, as you can see here. And also you have Tuskegee. As of last week, they were 2-2. Having won one game in conference play. And then Kentucky State and Central State, they're bringing up the rear, even though Central State has won a game outside of conference play. And then, of course, in the East, and I apologize for saying this, and to the fans of Savannah State, I do apologize to you. But as far as I'm concerned, in terms of the East Division, I only really see two teams that will be battling for conference supremacy for the East, and that is Benedict and Albany State. Benedict has already dispatched Fort Valley State, and I don't see any other team in the conference, or should I say in the East Division, that will give either one of those teams pause. I really don't. And I can see easily that Benedict will continue on their trek, continue on their way until 2 weeks from now, when they have to travel to Albany State. And as I said, that might be a game. I may be doing a pregame show. We'll see. And that game will take place on October 15th at Albany State in Albany, Georgia. And that's going to be a day game, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember if it's a 2 p.m. or a 3 p.m. game. But I'll let you know next week as we come back to you live. And as we continue to move on, and we'll move on to the final conference, and that happens to be the CIAA. And as far as the CIAA goes, here you are. I said earlier that Virginia State was right behind Virginia Union, only having lost one game, that being Virginia State only having lost one game. And then Virginia Union, they're undefeated. But then right behind them, being 2-1 in conference play, is Bowie State. And Bowie State is saying, hey guys, we're still here. Don't forget about us. We may have lost one game in conference play, but we're still here, and we are here to play, and we did come to play, and so just don't dispatch us too early. The one team that they did lose to was Shaw. And as you can see by the standings, Shaw happens to be in second place in the Southern Division. And in the Southern Division, as you can see, they're 2-3 in overall play, but they're 2-1 in conference play. And they are tied with Fort Valley State. And each of those teams are tied for 2-1, but Shaw lost today, and Fort Valley State, if I'm not mistaken, they actually are losing right now. And even though I had already given that game to Benedict, Fort Valley State will probably end up being 3-3 after the end of the day's game. And let me make sure, as far as the day and as far as the score goes, I want to make sure that I'm giving you the most up-to-date information that I do have at my disposal, going back and forth to my website to make sure that the scores are up to date and that I'm giving you up-to-date information. And let's see, in the CIAA, yes, I think those scores are actually correct. And I'm showing a final of 45-13. Yes, Benedict did defeat Fort Valley State 45-13. And that game should, let me check. I'm sorry, that was Fort Valley State and not Fayetteville State. And I apologize. I was looking at I was thinking about the wrong team. And Fayetteville State, and I apologize again, I was looking at the wrong team. Fayetteville State had this week off, and they'll be playing next week, of course. But Fayetteville State has this week off, and they will remain 2-1 in conference play, 3-2 overall. But Shaw ended up losing, and as you can see, the rest of the teams, you have Winston-Salem, Livingstone, and St. Augustine's, of course. I don't believe Winston-Salem played this week, but I know St. Augustine's and Livingstone, they ended up losing today. And Lincoln, that game against Lincoln, PA, that game was actually canceled today. And more than likely it was canceled because of the conditions of the hurricane that's going through the country right now on the East Coast. But let's keep everyone on the East Coast in our prayers, and make sure that everyone gets through this hurricane safe, with no injuries, or at least with your life, more than anything else. But as we continue to go through these scores, as we continue to go through the standings, Bowie State, as I said, is saying, don't forget about us, even having lost to Shaw. That's in the Southern Division, but they still have not played Virginia State, nor have they played Virginia Union. And when they play Virginia State and Virginia Union, those games, I can guarantee you, will be barn burners. And if Virginia Union can end up defeating Bowie State and Virginia Union and Virginia State, if Virginia Union ends up beating Bowie State and Virginia State, who else in the conference will defeat them? I don't see anyone. All I see is a walk in the park for Virginia Union. And if Fayetteville State holds on, then they again will go to their 5th championship game. And maybe this year they won't have to play Bowie State. And maybe this year they will have more success. But we shall see. And wow, what a walk. What a walk through conference play. We had some surprises today, and we're interested in seeing what other surprises there are going to be. And as we take a look, and before we close, we're going to see whether or not there are any updates to any scores. Some updates here. We have Florida A&M pulling away from the Delta Devils at home in Tallahassee, and that score now is 24-7, and that is a lead for Florida A&M. So they are finally pulling away. Texas Southern is still leading Alabama State, and that score happens to be 7-3. So the Hornets, they finally are on the board with the field goal. The Jaguars of Southern University, they're still leading, but now they're pulling away in the second quarter. They're leading UAPB by a score of 28-3, and the Panthers of Prairie View, they are leading Grambling by a score of 10-0. And in an earlier game, I already indicated that Alabama A&M defeated Bethune-Cookman by a score of 35-27. And some other scores that we are to update. Morgan State defeated Virginia Lynchburg. We mentioned all of the MEAC scores. They're all finals, except for Delaware State leading Robert Morris at halftime by a score of 7-3. That score is at half. And in terms of some of the other scores, you have Central State in the third quarter in the SIAC. Central State is leading Allen by a score of 21-20 in the third quarter. And of course, we mentioned that Tuskegee won, defeating Clark Atlanta by a score of 45-43 in in double overtime. So congratulations to them winning that game. Some of the other games that are, that are finally finishing up here. Let's see. I think all of the games that we are looking at have finally finished up. And as far as the independents, we have West Virginia State, the Yellow Jackets, leading the Battlers by a score of 23-3 in the fourth quarter. Also in the second quarter, you have North Carolina A&T leading Bryant by a score of 14-0. And Kaiser defeated Florida Memorial, of course, by a score of 48-7. And, of course, the big game that I talked about for the Independents, Tennessee State losing to Lane College by a score of 28-27. And that was a home game for Tennessee State. How the mighty have fallen. Or at least the question is whether or not the game against Jackson State took the wind out of their sail after having lost, because they played that game with every bit of fight that you could bring to a game, and they still lost. Great game, I can tell you. There were some hits. Tennessee State was really laying the lumber on Jackson State. They ended up winning. Jackson State did. But the way Tennessee State was playing, they were playing as if they had nothing to lose. And unfortunately, even though they were playing as if they had nothing to lose, they ended up losing. And I hate to say that, but they did. But with that being said, sports fans, we will call this a night. But we wanted to make sure we took a look at some of the football scores for HBCU games, and we wanted to make sure we brought them to you as up to date as we possibly could. I'm quite sure someone or some team has probably scored by now, but we're getting ready to go off the air. So next week, please join us again as we go through HBCU Game Day, and should I say, excuse me, Block Sports HBCU Game Day, as we take a look at some of the scores. And then sometime this month, just keep an eye on us, because we will be traveling in the month of October to a couple of football games, and we will be coming to you live. Can't say where yet, but just keep your eyes and your ears open for Block Sports to come to you live from a local HBCU stadium. And we will go to you, and we will come to you with the games, and see what happens. And with all of that being said, may God bless you. Hopefully you've gotten all of your shots, your booster shots. So if you do come down with COVID, it's not going to be a big deal. But just make sure you take care of yourself. Stay safe. And support your local HBCU school more than anything else. And I'll say this. I supported my HBCU school, which happens to be Jackson State, as you guys know. And as you can see, there you go. I supported my favorite HBCU school. We had our National Alumni Conference today. And I was right there making sure that everything went as smoothly as possible. So if you don't do anything else, make sure you support them. Don't just go to the game, but be a part of the Alumni Association. Give. If you don't give, shut the hell up. Don't say a word. Don't tell me how you think they're doing, what complaints you have. If you don't give, you don't have a voice. If you give, then you have a voice, and then I will listen. But if you are not a part of the association, and if you don't give, I won't listen. May God bless you. May God keep you. And I will see you next week.